Dusty. I'm one of the pastors at Redeemer Church, kind of our Redeemer Lubbock crew over here. And I think, first of all, I want to thank Mitch and the whole SBTC crew that I really can't believe. I'm going to give them a hand. I mean, it really is incredible what they're doing. I can't believe that there's an event like this. Like, it is so focused and so specific that it wasn't that long ago, I was only hearing, second and third hand from some of our college ministry people that would go up to Ames, Iowa and learn from the SALT people what was going on up there. And I'm like, no, what? So they're focusing it around college ministries and planting in college towns. Well, that's kind of what we're doing. Maybe we can learn something from that and even focus our vision going forward for Redeemer. And the fact that this is going on right here just blows me away, honestly. I think God's up to something really unique. So what I'm going to do is I've been given the topic of talking about abiding in Jesus and resting in Jesus. And the passage I want to use today to go down this path is Psalm 46. So it'll be on the screen in a minute, but we're just going to work through the psalm together. And my hope is to encourage you, but to encourage you, I'm going to have to discourage you first. So that's what we're going to more or less do. So Psalm 46, I'm going to start in verse 1, and I think it'll be coming alongside here on the screen if you don't have a Bible. So Psalm 46, verse 1. It says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. So that theme of God being refuge and strength, that's going to go throughout the course of the psalm, and we're going to get there in a minute. But for us to talk about the refuge and the strength part, I think we're going to have to focus a little bit on the last half of that verse, that last phrase where he's helping us in trouble. All right, like that's the backdrop, is trouble. And one of the things as a pastor that always blows me away is the stuff that people are going through. My sense of it is that if we knew what people were dealing with, and I'm talking everybody, the people that are around the table with you right now, the people you bump into that yell at the person in line at the checkout at the grocery store, the critical person at your church that's always got something that they think should be better. I mean, if you knew what was going on in people's lives, you probably would tend to be a lot more gentle and gracious. That people are just dealing with stuff all the time. And it could be something like they've got a kid that they can't get to sleep through the night, or it could be an older kid that is really off the rails, and maybe even an estranged relationship with that kid, or they are really anxious about retirement, and are they going to have enough money to ever quit working, or are they going to have to work until they die, and marriage problems, and people that are struggling with their marriage, and it's just not healthy, and they don't know what to do to fix it, and if they could go back, they wouldn't have married the same person if they could, or somebody that's single, and they're really happily single, but they're trying to figure out what to do with their life, or somebody that's single that really wishes that they didn't have to come home to a house that's alone. And I mean, on and on and on. I mean, we could spend all day long talking about trouble, and not to mention when people die, or people are abandoned or betrayed, and just sometimes the downstream effects of sin they take my breath away. I think that if we really knew the impact of our sin, we would think twice. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in a room and a problem I did not create and probably cannot solve, and I mean, whatever, somebody's stolen money from their company, they have committed adultery, they have whatever. I mean, it could be a million things, and the devastation of those that have been victimized by that, one, but then even the downstream effect on relatives and friends that are almost like first responders showing up at the scene and saying, whoa, like how can I help? And then they're brought into all this pain and loss and the betrayal and like just the ripple effects and the stain of what sin does and the brokenness of the world we live in. And so that's just general trouble. Like, you guys feeling that? Like, that is everyday life. Ministry in the church you just feel this all the time, because what we're doing is we're dealing with people all the time. And furthermore, they don't take me out of bubble wrap on Sunday mornings. One of the things I never know what to do with is when people give you a strange compliment and they're like, man, you seemed like you had some energy today, man. It's good. You seemed like that was a really good sermon. And I'm like, how am I supposed to take that? And the reality is that I've got all these things going on in my personal life, and I was in that counseling room on Thursday, and I walk up on the stage and into that counseling room or in a staff meeting as a human being that most certainly has not been in bubble wrap. So me, them, us, like this is the human experience, trouble. And then let's just chat COVID for a minute. So this is where I wish that the sermon I could deliver to you, it's a lot better as a preacher to be able to deliver a sermon that goes like this. Hey, a few years ago, I was exhausted and really discouraged, and here's what got me out of it. And now I'm going to kind of explain it to you, and we're going to walk through the Bible. And a long time ago, I really struggled with this, but now it's all better, and everything's fine now, and kind of walk this path that I walked a few years ago. But the reality of it is that I saw Kendra, one of the SALT people, right when we even hardly got to hang out on this trip, but I met her in Ames a year ago, right before COVID hit, and just the very first thing, I saw her, and I said, how are you? And you said, exhausted, is how she said. And I was like, if Kendra can be that honest, even in a greeting where you're supposed to say, oh, great, awesome, killing it, whatever you're supposed to say, that she says exhausted, that is for sure how I am. Like, I'm completely exhausted. I'm on fumes, in fact. And there's not been like any one thing that pushed me over the edge. It's been an accumulation of it, really over the past several months, and maybe some of you are going to be able to relate with this. That's my hope, that some of you, and I realize some of you aren't, so I'm just going to say this, for some of you that I know have lived your best life in the last year, and I've got people on our staff team that have. I've got very close friends that their marriage has never been healthier, their business has never been healthier, they've had a bunch of missional inroads with non-believing friends. I mean, there are really cool things happening for sure. Some people have experienced a closeness with the Lord that they haven't ever experienced before this year. And so for you, then this will be time released for you. Although I do suspect that trouble finds you all the time, and so it still relates even now. But the reality is that it's been an exhausting year, whether it's COVID stuff related to masking, and that no matter what you chose, you were wrong, right? And so what Redeemer Lubbock chose to do is we chose to, in about late June, that we had several people that were saying, hey, y'all should really require masks. It could limit the spread, and it'd be a great way to love your neighbor, and we're even hitting us up on social media about it. And we actually took a step back, evaluated it, and I realize that many of you will disagree with our particular stance on this, but what we chose to do is we chose to require masks from that point on until the governor made a statement from a Mexican food restaurant in Lubbock in the middle of March. Our case numbers were way down, and our immunizations were really flowing into our city. So that's what we did, and we lost a lot of people the week we did it. It was almost like the extremely COVID cautious crowd were like, hey, great job on the masking. Now, we're not coming, but really proud of you guys. And still aren't back, lots of them. And then your anti-masker crowd were like, what? And so they many of them just quit coming in protest that day. And so like that whole thing has happened, and we've had dozens and dozens of conversations. I'm sure you can relate with that. And I had friends that are pastors that chose the other end on that and said, well, look, we're going to recommend it. You can wear them if you want. And then people that wanted you to require them were really frustrated and didn't feel safe in coming. And so it was a tough one. And then there were times when we were addressing race, especially as things were really, heating up in a real fevered pitch in May and June. And on the same Sunday, I would get multiple emails from people saying, you said way too much, and you didn't say nearly enough. It's too weak. And like really, literally, the same messaging was catching both of those things. And so you had COVID-related pressure, and even some of our societal stress, politics. You had to think a lot of things along those lines. Furthermore, even in the church, this is kind of my take on what's happened in the last year. So I feel like that a really great marriage didn't completely unravel in the last 12 to 15 months. And a really healthy church and ministry did not unravel in the last 12 to 15 months. But let's say if something was like a 4 or a 5 or a 6, that it feels like to me this past year has turned that up to an 8, 9, or a 10 in terms of volume, and how people feel that, even how they express that, how it spills out onto other people. And so like that is what the year has been like. And if I were to think very long, I could probably come up with 10 marriages right now in the life of Redeemer with members that have already unraveled in the past few months or are very close to it, that they're like it's just all but somebody deciding they're going to pack their bags. Like it wouldn't take long for me to do that. It wouldn't take long for me to come up with maybe I mean, I could probably come up with 15 to 20 that have walked away from the faith, and it wouldn't take me long. I mean, it really wouldn't. And several that are close, that have expressed it to me, that are actively struggling, going, I don't know. I'm pretty close to pressing eject on that. Those hurt. Those have taken a toll. Our college director at the very beginning of January, he was on that video. In fact, it was like a painful sigh for me when I saw the video, as proud as I was of Justin, that our college director resigned like the first week of the semester. A lot of pain. And we have this awesome college ministry team over here. They are incredible. But what it was like for someone that we all love, it was like a hand grenade, just kind of bounce, 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 bounce. And the pin had been pulled. I tried the best that I could to jump on that grenade, along with Brandon, who's another one of our elders that's here, that was running our residency, and he stepped into the interim role, did that, but still a lot of that blast got out on our team, on our students, and it was just painful. It really was, and they were so awesome. Like, God worked and moved forward in the middle of it. I mean, honestly, like, it's really, truly incredible, like the amount of momentum and the things that are happening in our students' lives is a credit to you guys just keeping your eyes on Jesus and moving forward. But all this team here, I promise you, if you were to say, are you exhausted? what y'all's answer to that? Yeah, I mean, spent. So you've got all of that, all right? So this is kind of like group therapy for me. I'm already feeling better. And so, yeah, and I think for me, maybe the lowest point in it all was a couple of weeks ago. Sarah, who's one of our staff members that's here, sent an email earlier in the week, and I'm normally so good about this, but on a Saturday morning, my wife went to work, and she was on call that weekend, and my younger kid hadn't woken up yet. And I clicked on this email, and it was a member list, just trying to track down, where exactly are all of our people. And I just started, it was for the elders and some senior staff members, and I began to look through that list, and, so-and-so, they're probably, they're looking around, they've already left, nobody knows. We're reaching out, but we're not getting a lot in terms of what their intentions are. And for whatever reason, that part for me was probably my lowest point. And then I had to, get up and preach the next morning, and basically got no feedback that morning, and then show up the next morning, and I'm supposed to meet with a guy. And honestly, if I could have avoided it, I'd been dodging the meeting for weeks, and this says a lot more about me than it did about him. But he was wanting to connect, and I was like, man, he's going to need something from me. I just can tell you right now, this is going to be some kind of problem that he's going to need me. He's going to need some action for me, which that says a lot, doesn't it? That you're a pastor, and that's the first thing you think is, what are you going to need, buddy? That kind of thing. And man, it was the most encouraging meeting, and that started a series for me. Even in the middle of my exhaustion, and then bluntly, even my cynicism towards the Lord, that I feel like Jesus over the last 2 weeks has just been like reaching out to me in the middle of my exhaustion, where he's been like way taking the initiative to be my refuge and my strength and a very present help in trouble. Like this guy, he tells me that he came, crazy life, a lot of drugs and everything else, and he had just a radical transformation about 8 years ago. Moves to Lubbock in the middle of COVID, and then tells me that he'd visited 7 churches. All of them, every sermon was about politics and Trump and Jesus and the Republican Party, and if you did that, it'd all be fine. And he's like, man, I was just so hungry for Jesus. And like nobody was talking about Jesus. I didn't know a soul. He calls his pastor from back in Austin and says that he was planning on going out to Vegas, getting a prostitute. He was just desperate, falling back into some old patterns. And his pastor said, this is kind of unconventional advice, but says, what you ought to go do? Like, you're craving human touch. Why don't you get like a regular old massage? A human being talk to you, and even in an appropriate way, touch and all this. And the guy that's given the massage says, what hurts? And the guy's like, my heart. So he's telling me this, like at my lowest point, this guy is. And the guy said, and he starts walking through all the things. Like, I haven't been touched. Nobody's hugged me. I'm this. And the guy says, I got you, man. And he says, oh, I'm a Christian and I can't find a church. Everybody just wants to talk about politics. And he said, I got you. Is it okay if I put worship music on? And then prayed over the dude in the middle of the massage. And at the end of it, this dude, and he actually revealed some really vulnerable things that I won't share here, but at the end of it, And there'd be a lot of people that maybe even appropriately would say, okay, massage over, that's it. And he says, you know what, man, I've got a group of Christians, we meet for breakfast on Saturday mornings. It'd be great, a bunch of guys. Would you like to come? In fact, we're part of a small group. We call it a gospel community on Wednesday nights. It'd be fun of men and women together. It'd be really great. You wouldn't have to be alone. In fact, we're part of a worshiping community called Redeemer Church, and it'd be great if you're a part of that. To hear how God was using one of our members that wasn't just mad and yelling about masks or whatever, that was actually using his vocation as a massage therapist to use his gifts to apply human touch to someone. Furthermore, even introducing him to his personal circle of relationships, and then more broadly, life in the church. And there was a series of those, of people poking their head in my hallway and saying, can I pray for you real quick? And over again, I feel like God's been reaching out to me, including at this conference, including praying for me even as I came up here. So I'm hoping today that maybe as I'm sensing God reaching out to me and saying, you're not alone, there's trouble, that I'm your refuge and strength, a very present help for you. I'm hoping you're going to take this today as God's communication to you in the middle of exhaustion or discouragement, that he is your very present help in the middle of trouble. So let's keep moving in verse 2. And you're going to get a chance to have a chance to interact here. Some of that trouble is going to be laid out for you. Verse 2, therefore, because God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble, therefore we will not fear, though. So we're not going to be afraid. Even in the middle of our exhaustion, even while taking the shots, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling, Selah. All right, so it stops right here. All right. So while everything, it's like almost the image is you got a hurricane. Think of like the coast in California, like it has maybe in the central or northern coast with a lot of those tall bluffs. Imagine like a hurricane coming into that and it just ripping parts of the beachfront away and pulling it out to sea. Imagine a fortress there that you're wondering if the ground underneath you is just going to cave in a landslide. That you can come into this fortress and the waves hit it and just turn into like real pretty mist, basically. Like that's the image, is that it doesn't mean that the waves aren't real. It doesn't mean that there's not a hurricane, but what it does mean is that you have this fortress to go into, and you don't have to be afraid, is what it means. Even when in the middle of your exhaustion, you don't have to. And Selah means we should stop and pause and reflect on this reality that we don't have to be afraid because God is in charge. He is with us, and He's here to help. So here's what I want you to do. Since it said Selah, that we should consider this. What I'd like for you to do is, whether you're more of an Evernote person or you've got a paper journal, I'd like for you to spend just a couple of minutes, and I just want you to write down, what is your trouble? So like I just told you mine. I told you my trouble. And that's just some of it. There's more. But I've given you some of the high points, even some family stress too. But I want you to write down, what is your trouble? Okay? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. Maybe just another 30 seconds. I know you could write for a long time, probably. Here's what I want you to do. Cheesy or not, don't care. Turn to each other, and I want you to look at each other in the eyes, and I want you to say, we will not fear because God is with us. I want you to look at somebody in the eyes, and you're going to tell them that right now. We will not fear because God is with us. All right. Okay, and so you've said it to each other, awkwardly, but don't care. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. I would strongly encourage you at some point. I'm going to pick back up here in our regularly scheduled program now, but I would love it if over lunch today, on the drive home, for some of us have longer drives than others, and that you would just say, hey, so what's your trouble? You know, that now you even have an end to that and kind of an on-ramp onto each other's lives and onto each other's hearts is to talk about what you're dealing with right now. Where are you feeling pain? And maybe you don't feel the exhaustion like I do, or maybe you do. Maybe it's worse than that. Some of us maybe even feel hopeless, like you've even thought about if life's even worth living. It'd be incredible if you would share that with somebody. And God is with us in the middle of it. But listen to this hope now. So trouble's in the background, but from here on out, we're talking about God's nearness and his presence with us in the middle of this and what it means to abide in him. Verse 4, there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. So there's debate on what exactly this river is. Is it Eden? Is it Jerusalem's topography? Is it heaven, like the new heaven and new earth? There's a lot of different ways. Honestly, I think all those are taking you in the same direction, truly. Like the picture of Eden and Jerusalem was a bit of a shadow of what would come, and then ultimately heaven. All of them are representing God's presence. That's the thing that all three of them have in common, is God's nearness. And in the middle of this, like you have the imagery of the hurricane, and we're not going to be afraid. And the reason for that is there's actually a gentle river. So imagine if you've been to Colorado, a gentle river that's just rolling through that you'd love to lay out a hammock next to and hear that water gently go by. That's what we're talking about, and it represents God's presence. The nearness of God is needed when it's crazy and when it's not, for that matter. But listen to the trouble again in verse 6. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. So again, you've got the trouble reintroduced, going, yeah, but everybody's crazy. And people are mad all the time, and even feels like nothing's steady politically, both in our country and around the world. And right, I mean, like, this is nothing new. Like, this has been going on for a long, long time. And so there's the trouble, but then God's response to that is he utters his voice, like as he draws near and he speaks, and all of it melts in light of him. Verse 7, the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And again, Selah. So you just stop and consider that. So God is with us, and he's the fortress. That's repeated. That's pretty much exactly what we saw in verse 1. And I love that this image here of how God has been a fortress. So I'm going to actually ask you again to take just a second on your journal or your Evernote or whatever it is that you've got, and specifically, in the middle of whatever it is, whatever kind of trouble that you've been going through, how, not the stating the fact that God has been your fortress, but specifically how has God been your fortress in the middle of the trouble you're going through? I'm going to give you a minute or two. Specifically how? Is it through that meeting of the person that a meeting you're dodging, through a sermon, through a cup of coffee with a friend, through a time alone and reflection? Get about 30 more seconds. And I think this would be another maybe second half of that conversation when you're on your drive home today and as you're talking about the trouble to say, okay, and how have you experienced this nearness? And it's okay if you're like, man, honestly, I feel completely alone right now. It's okay to even say that. A lot of the psalmists say that a lot too. Let's keep moving. Verse 8, come behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. And you're like, all right, look, that's just talking about it all being made right. At the end of the day, there's going to be peace coming, and it's all going to be made right. All the loss and the pain and the hurricane that's, just throwing itself into the cliffs and all the trouble that you face, like it's all going away at some point. And the way that it's going away that isn't clear here, but becomes clear when you expand the larger narrative of the Bible out, is that God is going to come to the earth to do something about it. Jesus Christ. He's going to live sinlessly. He's going to die even though he didn't deserve it. And he's going to be resurrected from the dead. And for everybody that would put their hope in him, at some point, he's going to return and all of the trouble, all the wars are going to cease. All the chariots are going to burn, the tanks, the nukes, the masks, all of it. Like it's all going up in smoke. Like he's coming back. And the reason he's coming back is because he guaranteed that win whenever he was crucified and resurrected from the dead. And someday he's going to fix it. And so like that's the future of all of this. In the middle of our trouble, what the psalmist is doing here is pointing our attention back to God and even the reality that ultimately he will win through the cross and resurrection. Someday he's going to make it right. That means the trouble that we're experiencing right now is truly temporary, no matter how real it feels. And so now we move on to the star of the show, verse 10. This is a verse you might know. It says, be still and know that I am God. I want to just stop on that for a second. Be still and know that I am God. And this is really my encouragement for you whenever it lands today. Like if you're exhausted, you're really discouraged, you're wondering if you even want to do church work. I'm talking to lots of pastors, and the stats are showing it too, that as many, even a more recent survey, it was saying 25%, but now the number is more like a third of pastors that are saying, I might want to do something different. I just don't know if it's worth it. I met a really good friend that's been in the game a long time yesterday that planted a church over 15 years ago. And I've never heard him talk this way, but he said, not like right now, but I'm kind of thinking about a 5 to 7 year plan right now. And I just wonder how much of that, how many people are going to be like, I don't know, man, like I care about it all. I just don't know how much more I've got it in the tank. Like what do I do when I'm exhausted? How do I move forward in my walk with Jesus? How do I move forward in almost anything? And the answer is that we, in the middle of knowing that God is our fortress in the midst of trouble and that he's present, is to access that, we be still and we know that he's God. We're going to be still and know that he's God. And so I want to encourage you on this. Like, be still is a command. And this is so hard for us culturally that John Mark Comer is doing some great work on this. And I think I went on his podcast and book that the modern American, our attention span is actually worse than a goldfish right now. 7 seconds is what it is. And look, like there's not going to be a path of like spiritual growth and renewal when the longest amount of concentration we can do is on a tweet. All right, so like there's just going to be some limits to this, and there's this ancient path that God is calling us onto to be still and then know that he is God. Like be still and know that he is God. And you're like, wait, is this whole sermon basically to say to have a quiet time? And it kind of is. It's that, and like there's this ancient road of discipleship, and I wish that I had a magic bullet saying, give me something to make me feel better now. And really what I've got is be still and know that I'm God, and you're going to carve that out and do that individually. And this is a sermon for me right now. Like what sermon do I need to hear while I'm exhausted and on fumes? Be still and know that I'm God. And that means individually. It means with your friends. That doesn't all need to be done alone. In your friendships, to be honest and vulnerable in that. And while you gather with the church and we worship together and take communion and we sing and we unplug, that we're going to be still and we're going to know that he's God. There's even a level of pushing back on just the frantic pace. And I'm going to give a couple of practical things on that in just a moment. But this last part is really significant, a part of the verse that we may not know. And I think leader types in ministry really need to hear this. Be still and know that I'm God. And listen to this last part. I will be exalted in the nations. I will be exalted in all of the earth. So part of that is not just to get a coffee cup and sit by the river, and even though yes for sure, I plan to do that quite a bit this summer. So yes, but there's actually something here to say to self-important leaders who think that the whole world hangs on you, that the kingdom of God is not going to move forward unless you say go, And like Zach Eswine probably says this better than everybody. He takes those three omnis of God about how God he's omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient, those three things. And the temptation as leaders, Christian leaders, especially pastors, is to be everywhere at once, to have all the answers, and to be all powerful and all knowing and all wise and all that, to basically be Jesus. And God's not calling you into that. He's not. And that's a correction for all of us. And so when we know that God will complete the Great Commission, He will be exalted among all nations. He will see people know Him through His crucified and resurrected Son, Jesus, through the empowerment of the Spirit. He will see these things happen all across our land to the ends of the earth. It will happen. And gratefully, we get to be a part of that. But there's something really humbling about saying, shh, just slow this whole thing down. I'm going to be still. I'm going to be a son for a moment. I am not the sum of my identity as pastor. That I think it's one of the occupational hazards of being a pastor and a ministry leader is it's so hard to untangle yourself from the role. Like who even am I other than the person that gets up here and dances, that I think Drew mentioned that yesterday. Get up here and do something awesome for me. Get up here and do something, do a sermon that'll make more people want to come, or fix my marriage, or whatever. And I hope that I do those things that help. I hope you do those things that help whenever you have a student that's really struggling and they're lonely and I do hope we can help. But this passage right here is a solid dose of humility saying, He is God, and that means you're not. And we're going to need to be still to actively set our mind on that. And we may have other people around us, or it may be alone, but we're going to need some regular patterns of acknowledging that He is God and even connecting with Him and finding a point of soul rest in this. And a couple of just practical things on this. Here'd be what I would urge you to consider. I think there's some rhythms that you need to establish every day. I think you need to spend time with Jesus, and there needs to be a be still moment that happens for me before I start my work day. I also think even in the evening that having some time where you put your phone up and you be present with those who are around you and just stop, even though there's more work to do. I think in general, it's great if you can find a way to not work all 3/3 of a day, that our college staff's doing a good job. If they've got college gathering, they try to take that morning off, or at least the following morning off. So I think that's something to consider weekly. I think at least a day, unless there's something unique, at least a day that you just unplug. And listen, I know there's more to do. That sermon can be tightened up. There's a student that you can meet with. There's emails you could respond to, or Slack, or whatever you use. Like there are things to do, but this is the argument I'm going to make on the be still and rest argument here in verse 10, isn't that what you did when you became a Christian? Isn't that what you did? As you said, there's a lot more work I need to do. There's all sorts of unfinished business. I should have been a better person. I should have reflected God. I should not have dishonored Him. I should not have ignored Him. There was all kinds of more work to do, but I couldn't. And Jesus, you did that work on my behalf. You lived perfectly, sinlessly, righteously, and in your crucifixion, you gave all of that to me, and you took all of the broken things. So, like, I don't have anything to prove, so I'm just believing in you. That's what you did when you became a Christian. So you're making a gospel statement when you put the phone up, whenever you disconnect from your work. For me, being outside is really renewing for me. It even kind of stokes those fires spiritually. That's something I've been doing very intentionally as a response to my lower spot over the last 2 weeks. But those daily and weekly rhythms, and then I would encourage you on a more regular basis, quarterly, annually, to take a week and do things that are really renewing for you and unplug, and you're not doing anything vocationally, and you've got extra time with the Lord to connect, and you're going to be still and know that He's God, and maybe in a place where you're out of your normal routine and you're not tempted to overfunction like pastors can tend to overfunction in all of it. So those are just a few basic rhythms, and again, you're like, so this whole thing is spend time with God and be part of the church, and take some off days, and kind of, man, I'm like, I'd love to have like a silver bullet for you, but there's this ancient path of discipleship we're being called onto in community with one another, and gratefully getting a chance to be on Jesus' mission. And then finally, this concludes in verse 11, just like it started. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. I mean, he's here, and even though it may not feel like it. And I'll just conclude with this, that, I'm doing this leadership cohort, and I go to Raleigh, North Carolina about 4 times a year. A guy named Elliot Grudem leads it for lead pastors. It's really, really good, been really helpful. And he was doing a thing a while back, and he was walking through Jesus and how he dealt with different kinds of people, enemies, foolish people, sick and hurting people. He just walked through it, and it was nothing fancy, really at all, but also struck by it. One in particular that he talked about in when Jesus turned the water into wine. That's the first miracle in the book of John. And, there he said, look, let's just face facts. Somebody messed up, that there's a wedding, and the mom, I don't know if it'd be the groom or the bride, didn't order enough wine. Like somebody messed up. And so probably what happens is that the mom of that groom or bride comes up to Mary and is like, can you help? Is there something you can do to fix this? And then Jesus does it. Like he actually intervenes, and he turns the water into wine, and like nobody knows. Like he totally covers for them. Like everybody, all the guests in the party, wine kept coming out in exactly the same way, in the same kind of containers that it had been coming out. And in fact, it was even better wine than when they started, all right? And what a shocker that is, that Jesus would do that and just cover for them. I mean, he could have said, look, this isn't my problem. This stuff doesn't even matter. It's not eternal, Who cares if this is a good party, and if you lose some face, it's probably good for you, That's what I would expect Jesus to say. But in fact, he just, out of love, covers for them. So here's the thing I want to say to you is, what would happen if Jesus might cover for you, even in moments where you're not wise and where you don't have the capacity to make all the meetings that you can, where you lack the strength to just be on all the time, to do all the things that you feel like you should do. Like I even had this image come out that I shared with that group, that sometimes what I feel like I am is I imagine almost like Vietnam, and I'm on a combat tour, and I've left the fire base, and I'm out in the bush, and I'm leading a group of people, and we're all out there, and we've taken fire. We're given orders to go take the hill, and we did, but we lost about half of our group. I come back, I've got stuff, I'm bloodied, saw a few people blown away, a few of them took off and ran away, and I don't know what happened to them, and I come limping back into the compound, and first of all, that's telling that Jesus was in the compound and not with me. And then I come back, and how I can almost imagine Jesus being is looking at me, and with his arms crossed, and saying, well, sorry you lost some guys, but then him jumping in and saying, look, I told you to guard that flank. And I told you, you wouldn't have lost those people if you would have, and if you would have, and if you would have been here, and if you would have here, and I'll just kind of take it, and you're right, I'll try to do better next time, and be out of here at 600. You can, get a bed tonight and shower up, but you're gonna need to go back out, and I expect better performance tomorrow. Does this self-talk ever happen to you? And what would happen instead if Jesus would come up and give us a hug, and he would say, look, man, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that you saw what you saw and that you've lost what you've lost. And I'm with you through all of that. Like, I'm not going to send you out on your own, but I'm going to go with you, and I care, and you can just rest in me even while the trouble is all around you, and know that I've got you. I love you. I know what it's like to be you. You're not your wins and your losses. You're not your strategy. You're not your future church plant that's going to be awesome, that's only in your head right now. You're not in your future relationships. That right now, where you are, tired, doubting, struggling, God loves you. He's a God who cares for you. He is with you. He's your fortress, and you can be still and know that he is God. So I'm going to pray. Lord, let that be true. Let that resonate with every soul here. Lord, let me believe it firmly, that there would be soul rest for me and everybody that's here, even in the middle of the crazy season that we're in. So Lord, thank you that you're a God of rest and kindness, that you speak to us, you move through us, and somehow we get to be included in it. But Lord, for tired people, would you help us to be still and know that you are God, and that you will be exalted among the nations. You will be exalted in all the earth. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.